Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, Marcus Devaney returned home to the 10-story apartment block where he lived, called St. James, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. The pockets in his rather bedraggled tartan pants were now completely empty. There wasn't a penny in sight, and his heart was equally as heavy, because life had not been remotely easy here in the Big Apple. His mother back in Tennessee, bless her heart, had assured him that coming to New York City would change his fortune for good. "Go to New York, Marcus," she had said. "Doors will open for you that you never dreamed remotely possible. New York is a vibrant, bustling metropolis where opportunity can grab you by the hand and lead you down an opulent, very auspicious path of good fortune and prosperity. Don't you dare stay here in Tennessee with me looking after your old mother. A young man like yourself needs to be in a bright, exciting place. You've got a whole future ahead of you, love. New York is exactly where you need to be, especially after the war, when everything is coming back to life again, rather like the spring after a very barren winter." Marcus would see his mother about once every 2 months, and that was if he was lucky. He had never really let her know how he barely managed to make ends meet in his current rather bleak circumstances. Things had actually been rather tough for him in New York, but giving his mother such unsettling revelations would have almost certainly broken her heart. April Devaney was a petite, bird-like woman of Irish descent, who had fallen pregnant with Marcus when she was 15 years old, when she had been a very naive Irish lass living in Galway of all places, and to save her family from much embarrassment, shame and humiliation, had subsequently emigrated to America to start a brand new life for herself by moving in with her father's brother, so that her family back in Ireland would not be shamed about her giving birth out of wedlock. Marcus would never know who his father was, because his mother had enjoyed a fling with a young man from Dublin, whom she never ever saw again. Alas for someone like Marcus, who didn't have a college degree behind him, or any kind of qualification, so to speak, had come to the Big Apple to improve his lot in life, like so many young aspiring hopefuls much like himself. But it had not been without its fraught challenges and drawbacks, of which there had been far too many to count. Put simply, things had been much harder than he had anticipated, and finding work was never easy. It was a laborious struggle. The year was 1948, and Marcus was 25 years old at the time. This was a transitional time for America after the Second World War, a couple of years before the economic boom of the 1950s under Dwight Eisenhower. Marcus was well built as a young man, and he had such a good and kind heart. But that had not got him terribly far in such a competitive marketplace where people were competing for the same very basic jobs, for minimum wage or even less. Marcus had cleaned public toilets, swept the sidewalks, helped in a laundrette, and been a washer-up at a couple of restaurants where he'd worked into the early hours of the morning, ensuring the kitchens were fastidiously clean, so much so that you could actually eat your dinner off the floor. Put simply, he had done all the punishing, back-breaking and dog's body jobs that nobody else wanted to do. So he was used to getting his hands filthy dirty and being paid pittance for the trouble. His hands had been left with rough skin, and there were unsightly calluses on his fingers. Marcus had rented a dingy apartment from a somewhat formidable landlord called Leonard Delamere, who drove around in a fancy jet-black Rolls-Royce that was so incredibly stunning people would stop on the sidewalks to stare at the magnificent car, for it was an enviable sight to behold. Leonard Delamere was profoundly stout. He looked like a cartoon-like character that had stepped out of an 1800s black-and-white movie. He was very old-fashioned and wore a pocket watch on a rather debonair-looking chain, a top hat, come rain or shine, and a very distinguished overcoat. He had curly brown hair, unkempt, rather bushy eyebrows, long sideburns that were slightly gingery on either side of his cheeks, and he wore round glasses that made him look exactly like an owl. So every time the man came to collect his rent money from Marcus, it was difficult not to smile at him and to suppress a laugh. Unfortunately for Marcus, Leonard Delamere had about as much humour as a stone-cold stodgy bowl of porridge, and always seemed to be disdainful and rather brusque in manner. He looked on Marcus with as much disapproval as you might look on a cockroach on the landing that you'd like to crush under the weight of a heavy boot. He was stinking rich, but did nothing to improve the sad, poor quality living conditions in the tacky apartment block at St. James. The crude, heavily stained carpets on the stairwell were so threadbare that it was easy to get your foot entangled in some of the loose threads, and many people had nearly fallen from such unfortunate confrontations with the deadly, somewhat tawdry carpet. The shabby, very unglamorous hallway was both dingy and dark, with a chandelier that was missing most of its globes, that had never been replaced. There was an overpowering, musty, mildewy smell that suggested there was rising damp somewhere in the building. There were telltale rats' droppings on the landing that suggested the place was infested with rodents. Marcus wasn't remotely surprised by any of this, as one of the elderly residents, a man called Warwick Thomas, who lived on the 6th floor at apartment number 62, would always leave his rubbish in a big brown box outside his front door, with the good intention of throwing it down the rubbish chute. But the old man's waning memory meant, despite his very best intentions, he clean forgot about the most basic of chores, so that the local residents in the apartment block took it upon themselves to dispose of the man's rubbish on his behalf. There was no doubt that this elderly gentleman might have actively encouraged a family of rats to lay down roots in the apartment block. At night, when Marcus lay under the rough and ready, very shabby sheets of his single bed, with a mattress that was so hard you might as well have slept on the floor, for it offered you no comfort whatsoever, he'd often hear a scratching sound and several scuffles, but luckily the light in his room was so dim, thanks to Leonard Delamere never replacing the light fittings, that Marcus didn't have to watch the nocturnal life going on around him, which for his peace of mind he'd rather not be privy to actually seeing. On one occasion a pair of tiny cold feet had scurried across his face and given him quite the shock. Sometimes it was best to turn a blind eye to such things, or you might be refused a good night's sleep, and with a kind of hard labour Marcus put in most of his manual jobs that invariably required a lot of elbow grease. He needed to get all the sleep he possibly could. Some of the residents at St. James had put traps around the apartments' hallways and corridors, but alas, the salient rats seemed to be too clever for their own good, and only a pitiful few had ever been successfully caught. One of the residents had brought in a cat called Talissa to go after the rats in the apartment, but alas, Talissa's interest in the rat population was minimal. She had far more interest in defending her own turf from other stray cats that might have ideas above their station, and think that they could move into St. James. That was certainly not going to happen under Talissa's discerning watch. Talissa was engaged in all kinds of brawls with the stray cats in the neighbourhood, especially those who attempted to make St. James their new home. They did so with little success. Talissa's caterwauling could be heard into the late hours of the night, when she was having confrontations with other cats, that she was always determined to chase away, come hell or high water. Talissa seemed to visit all the residents in the apartment block, but had a special attachment to Marcus for reasons Marcus did not understand. But they often say cats choose their owners, not the other way around, even though Talissa did not belong to Marcus. Talissa's owner was rather indifferent towards the cat, especially since Talissa had made no inroads into the rat population. She was always artfully on the prowl for titbits among many of the residents, who were seduced by the cat's affectionate nature, and they would regularly feed her, so that she grew fatter and fatter. But as for catching rats, she had failed in that endeavour. By nature she was naturally lazy, and seemed to enjoy sleeping most of the day, lounging on the people's couches at St. James. But it was usually Marcus that received the regular visits from the cat, and if anyone was looking for Talissa, they'd more than likely find her lying lackadaisically on Marcus's rather scruffy couch. Talissa certainly had a taste for the good life. She seemed to think all the residents that occupied the apartments at St. James belonged to her in some way, so that any other cats daring to venture close to the apartments, well, they'd be held to pay as far as she was concerned. She kept them all at bay, even if it meant she continued to caterwaul during the night. Every time Marcus or any of the local residents living at the apartment block in St. James raised some of their issues with Lenna about the ramshackle, decrepit state of the apartment block and the desperate need for the crumbling, unsound building to be fixed up and repaired, especially the electric connections that were seriously dodgy and would probably be considered illegal, Lenna would all but give the residents a haughty, rather cocky and smug look and say, "If you don't like it here, you can always move away, can you not? It's no skin off my nose if you leave. Many people want to rent out my apartments at such a steal, so if you don't want your apartment, I can get a replacement in half a second." Alas, there was no arguing with Lenna on this bitter truth that reminded the residents of their low rank in society, where their voices of complaint were always lost to the wind. So the residents at the St. James apartment block were stuck between a rock and a hard place. The apartments at St. James were cheap and extremely affordable, if you were down on your luck, that is, and pretty much didn't have a brass farthing to rub together, which might explain why they were in such a decrepit state of decay. But Marcus was resigned to the fact that beggars can't always be choosers, so he accepted his lot without too much complaint. Sometimes you had to settle for less than congenial conditions just to survive, and at the very least he was living better than some people in our society, even though that wasn't saying very much. He shuddered as he thought about his mother back at home, and how she would react if she was to see his current living conditions. Life in Tennessee had been tough, granted that, and people didn't have life easy there, but he'd lived a whole lot better than out here in the Big Apple. And if his mother knew the truth, the sobering truth that is, about his current lot in life, the woman would be absolutely devastated. Marcus had put his mother's mind at rest by assuring her that he had found the perfect apartment and had a great job at a restaurant. He failed to mention his job at the restaurant that he had at the time was only about washing the dishes in the back scullery, in piping hot soapy water that had made his fingers go raw, rather than showing people to their tables, greeting all the patrons, or managing the staff. Those were details he failed to mention to his mother, to offer her peace of mind, and the soft ball of assurance that all was going well with him, when the reverse was actually true. But Marcus was far too proud to disappoint his beloved mother. Marcus often soothed himself by assuring himself that at the very least, at least here at St. James, he had a roof over his head, even if it did mean the odd rat trotted over his face during the ungodly hours of the night, mistaking him for a railway track. He was grateful for small mercies, however pitiful they may actually be. Marcus's poky little apartment was dingy and small, but it had a tiny kitchen, bathroom, living room area and bedroom, and very often Talissa the cat would pay him a special visit, which she did every day like clockwork, slipping through the kitchen window, which she was beginning to struggle to squeeze through these days, owing to her recent weight gain. She would hang out on the couch with him, especially if the sun cast its warm rays across the sofa, as the cat loved to lap up the sunshine, as if she was a salamander. Talissa, for some reason, loved lying among Marcus's clothes, as if his familiar scent offered her comfort. He enjoyed the cat's company very much, and would regularly find himself talking to Talissa, telling her about his life in Tennessee. Talissa would look at him through her yellow eyes, and Marcus felt in her that he'd found a friend, even if it was the furry variety that couldn't exactly talk back. It was lonely being in New York, where Marcus had made absolutely no friends, as people were caught up in their own little social gatherings. But there was a good atmosphere in New York post-war, and people were genuinely optimistic about the future, as with Hitler's reign of terror coming to an abrupt full stop, people could begin to dream again. When Marcus returned home to the apartment, he opened the scratched-up red front door with the number 82 engraved in the wood, and let out a grievous sigh. He made his way into the poky kitchen, where he knew the food left in the tiny little cupboard above the sink that he referred to as the pantry would be pitiful, and with no money left to his name, he was in a seriously bad place. He could see in the cupboard was a can of sardines, a box of dried-up biscuits, a packet of spaghetti, and a tin of tomatoes. He knew only too well the tin of sardines would likely end up being eaten by Talissa. He could refuse that cat nothing, even if he had to go hungry himself, as such was his devotion to a cat that could well do with losing a few pounds, if the truth be told. Marcus had already paid this week's rent, but he needed to find work to gather the funds for next week's rent, or Leonard Delamere would more than likely throw him out of his apartment, and if he wasn't careful he might end up in a homeless shelter, and that was the last place he'd want to end up. He'd sometimes picked up a bowl of soup at a local soup kitchen, with a big chunk of brown bread, when times were tough for him. But moving into a homeless shelter was falling down a slippery slope, and once you hit the bottom, it was almost impossible to climb back up again. He'd seen it all before, too many times to mention. Homeless people who'd given up all hope, that had been evacuated from their lives. Marcus didn't want to sink to that rock-bottom place if he could possibly help it. He was not going to go down without a fight. This had been a taxing day, if ever he'd seen one, in which he'd been unable to find any local work. He had waited patiently in the corner of Broadway, with a whole lot of like-minded unemployed people, all waiting for an opportunity to find some day work. On this occasion Marcus had not been one of the lucky ones, and favour had failed to shine down upon him. Marcus had walked away with some of the other stragglers, realizing that this was not going to be a good day for him, for any job opportunities had sadly eluded him. With a heavy heart and a resigned spirit, Marcus had walked to the post office to inspect the advertisements for jobs on the notice board there. He'd seen a sign that had not been there the previous day, written on a pink, very fancy stock card in a rather elegant flowing hand. For some reason it had grabbed his undivided attention almost at once. In that fleeting second his heart began to judder in his chest. He looked rather nervously around the post office to see if anyone was paying him attention, but people were very absorbed in their own affairs. One woman was having a go at the woman behind the reception desk at the post office about the cost of postal stamps being way too expensive. Someone else was having their letter weighed to get a price for how much the postal costs would be to send the chunky letter abroad. No one appeared to have noticed Marcus loitering around the notice board, albeit rather furtively. In this quintessential moment Marcus had struck while the iron was hot. He sneakily snatched the advertisement away from the signboard, so that the pin fell to the ground. He clandestinely tucked the pink piece of stock card into his pocket, folding it with a degree of difficulty. No one had seen him do it. Marcus was well used to applying for jobs time after time, when there were several other applicants applying for the same job. He hoped by sneaking away this advertisement he would reduce the odds dramatically. Marcus reasoned that if you ironed away the competition by being the only job applicant applying for the job, it certainly increased your likelihood of being employed, and Marcus was absolutely desperate to find work. He couldn't go on living hand to mouth like this. He needed some form of steady, reliable income. At some point he wanted to return to Tennessee with money for his mother, so she could purchase some nice things for herself. As slowly but surely the economy was beginning to improve, Marcus knew that in this dog-eat-dog world you sometimes did what you needed to do to survive, as America was still struggling to get back on her feet again after the war. For some reason the advertisement had grabbed his attention, especially the handsome wage being offered. When he returned to his apartment and put on the kettle to make some much-needed tea, his calloused fingers trembled very excitedly as he pulled the crumpled piece of stock card out of his pocket to study and examine it more clearly. He felt a thrilling tingle trickle down his spine, the likes of such he'd never experienced before. He read the ad. For some reason he knew this sounded like the perfect job for him, offering not only an irresistibly decent wage package, but also a guaranteed roof over his head. Given most of Marcus's money was spent on paying his weekly rent to Leonard de la Mare, not having to pay rent would be a godsend for him. As a consequence, maybe he really would be able to save up some good money to bring home to Tennessee for his mother, and that would make her very proud. He could see in his mind's eye her little face breaking out into a huge smile as he presented her with a sizable amount of cash. She would say very demurely, "But I can't possibly accept all this money from you, Marcus. It's far too much, far too generous of you." Marcus would smile at his mother and say, "There's plenty more where that came from, Mum. Just enjoy, will you?" As Marcus thought about this, he was more resolutely determined than ever to find the job that could change his life for the better. Marcus read the advertisement over and over again, trying to get the full measure of what this job was about. The ad read, "Groundskeeper needed for Clayton Manor, New York State, an hour and a half outside of New York. Private rural address will be given on application in response to the advertisement. You will receive a handsome weekly wage packet and live on the property grounds. Job includes sweeping up dead leaves, weeding, manicuring the lawns, hedges, and taking care of the soon-to-be-established rose gardens. Contact Mr. Zach O'Rourke at 554-3456. No experience needed, but you must be hard-working and dedicated and reasonably strong. Job will not be for the faint of heart." "I must get to the phone," thought Marcus, fumbling around the apartment to look for change. But he had no money at his disposal, until of course he remembered he had a couple of coins at the bottom of his old suitcase, which was at the top of the old run-down closet, covered with dust, that he'd clean forgotten all about. He had left the coins there at the bottom of the suitcase for a rainy day, if things became bleak enough, and he needed the money. Marcus brought down the old suitcase. It crashed to the ground with a mighty bang, shaking the entire apartment, and rattling all the furnishings, bringing down with it a long sheet of dust that made Marcus wheeze, cough, and splutter. "Bloody hell," he thought, "I can barely breathe in here." He had no idea there was so much dust on top of that closet. Marcus emptied the decrepit old suitcase, which was an ancient relic from the First World War, that had belonged to a family member of theirs that had long since passed away. For a moment he stared disbelievingly at the wooden floor, as the coins he believed were in the suitcase did not appear to be there, and for a moment all the valuable life-giving breath was rudely sucked out of his lungs with the force of an industrial vacuum cleaner, as he pondered on what to do. How could he apply for a job if he had no money for a payphone? Maybe he could borrow some loose change from the nice lady living in the apartment next door to his, but he didn't want to rely on the kindness of strangers. He frantically began to shake the suitcase, tipping it upside down. He was behaving like a desperate rat, looking for a life-giving morsel or crumb of cheese, and then he heard a tinkling sound and something clunked to the floor, and then he found the coins he was looking for. He was so relieved. He felt like a drowning man who suddenly found a life vest and knows that he's not going to drown after all. With dirty, filthy hands covered with a tsunami of dust that greeted him from the closet, covering his hair and face, making Marcus look as if he swept chimneys for a living, he hastily pocketed the coins, looking down on them as a pirate's ill-gotten treasure. He scrambled out of his apartment, like an eager raccoon that had received the bounty from a bakery dumpster, and had rushed off with a couple of dry doughnuts as trophies. He'd almost locked himself out of the front door in the process, as such was his eager enthusiasm and haste to get to a phone box in time. But luckily he put his foot in the door before it slammed shut behind him, which was just as well, as he couldn't possibly afford to pay for the services of a locksmith to get him back into the apartment again, as that would be money he could ill afford to spend. And calling the likes of Leonard de la Mare to come to his help, to give him a spare key, would be a costly mistake he would be unlikely to forget, and would likely cost him the deposit on his apartment. Moments later he trotted down the street, having received some rather disapproving, condescending glances from a couple of well-dressed women, wearing elegant A-line skirts with thin belts and matching bodices, who looked appalled by the state of him, but Marcus didn't care a jot. He hastily dashed all the way to the phone box. He was completely out of breath by the time he reached it. But to his bitter disappointment, a wealthy woman was standing at the phone box, wearing a perfectly meticulous smock dress. Her ear was pinned to the phone. She was having a garrulous, lackadaisical natter with a girlfriend of hers, and Marco wanted to scream blue murder. He was so frustrated, as in his mind's eye, the longer the woman talked, the sooner the job he was after might be given to some other hopeful applicant, as that was the sad story of his life. And for all he knew, Zack O'Rourke, the man who had obviously posted the ad, might have placed similar ads around other parts of the city, which was more than likely the case. "Please hurry up, you old bat," he was inwardly praying. "Please get off the damned phone. I need this job before somebody else gets it." The woman at the phone box was obnoxiously loud. Even Marcus, who had not wanted to eavesdrop on her conversation, could not help but hear every single vain word that was spoken. He could not help but feel that the fairer sex had made talking into an art form, as Marcus was a man of few words himself. "Oh, yes, I know. Isn't it frightful? I don't mean to be rude, but that woman dresses like a washerwoman in every sense of the word. She has absolutely no style, does she?" "I know. Yes, I know. Oh, my God, that hair of hers. It's too dreadful for words, frightfully fizzy. I'm so grateful I don't have hair that's so atrociously untamed. Mine is manageable, you know. But then I do use a very good shampoo. I use Peggy Brown's lustrous cream shampoo with conditioners in it. It's my best-kept secret." "Oh, thank you. No, everybody tells me that my hair is beautiful, so now you know my secret too. Yes, the shampoo's very expensive, but Peggy Brown's shampoo is in a league of its own. And honestly, it can tame down the worst frizz." "Oh, I know. You're absolutely right. I've never liked her either. She's dreadfully haughty. Thinks she's better than anybody else, doesn't she? The other day I know she saw me because she crossed the road to the other side. She pretended not to see me. Now that is rude. Anyway, she dashed into the Rose Maddox hat shop of all places. She came out with 3 striped boxes of hats. And I'm not kidding you either. You know what Rose Maddox's hats are like. They're as close to perfect as you can get. I mean, we're talking super expensive. Those hats cost a bob or two, let me tell you. That woman knows how to spend her husband's money. That's why she married him in the first place. But she's got no charm whatsoever. I know. I absolutely know. Don't tell me you think she's attractive, Anna. Honestly, how can you say that? Where did you get that absurd idea from? The woman is like Cinderella's ugly sister. She's as ugly as they come. She thinks she's a stunner, of course, but she's not. Well, yes, we can agree to disagree, shall we? But I think she's frightful in every sense of the word, and I'm sorry, but I do." The woman appeared to be having an argument about whether this woman they were nattering about was attractive or not, although they both established she was filthy rich and spoilt rotten, whoever she was. And in that regard Marcus did not care. He wanted this annoying, frustrating woman to get off the phone as soon as she possibly could. as he needed to make that essential phone call that could potentially change his entire life, while this woman's idle gossip served no greater purpose. Finally, Marcus sighed with relief when the woman was saying, "Hello, hello, are you there, Anna? Are you there? Oh dear me, I've run out of money, can you believe it? Yes, I've got no more spare change. I'm going to have to end the call, I'm afraid. But don't you worry, we can continue this conversation tomorrow. I know it's a dreadful nuisance, but what can you do?" Finally, the woman left the phone booth, mumbling under her breath that there was no way that a woman like Lucy Tucker was remotely attractive. Marcus quickly dived into the phone booth, rather like a vulture onto a dead carcass, as if his entire life depended on it. He pressed the coin into the slot, dialed the number, and inwardly prayed someone would answer the phone. "Please, God, may I get this job?" He realized that he was praying a silent prayer, and he hoped that God would in some way hear him. "Hello," came the answer at the end of the phone. "Zach O'Rourke speaking. How may I help you?" "Hello, Mr. O'Rourke. This is Marcus Deveroy speaking. You don't know me, but I saw your advertisement in the post office, written on the pink stock card, this afternoon, advertising for a groundskeeper for Clayton Manor. I'm interested in the job, sir. I'm hard-working, strong, reliable and trustworthy." There was a long pause at the end of the phone, until finally Zach O'Rourke spoke. "Thank you very much, Mr. Deveroy, for responding to my advertisement. Have you, by any chance, had any experience in taking care of a large property?" "Yes, sir. I've done plenty of yard work before. I'm quite capable of getting my hands dirty, and I'm extremely strong." "Very well, Mr. Deveroy. Since you are the only applicant we've had for the job, in the circumstances, for the time being, the job is yours. Provided, of course, you do a satisfactory job. You will receive your wages weekly, Mr. Deveroy, and live on the property in the little cottage on the grounds that I have had prepared for you. If I'm not fully satisfied with your work, you will be asked to leave forthwith." Zach O'Rourke rattled off the address of Clayton Manor. "You will start work on Thursday, Mr. Deveroy. I look forward to you working for me." And before Marcus could ask him anything else about the job, Zach O'Rourke had put down the telephone and abruptly ended the phone call. Marcus did not know exactly how to react to the abrupt end in the telephone call. He should be pleased. Zach O'Rourke had given him the job that started on Thursday, which was the day after tomorrow. Zach O'Rourke sounded as if he had a plum in his mouth, so he was clearly extremely upper crust and came from oodles of money. But he had been so aloof, so ambiguously vague, so very insouciant about everything, so much so that Marcus knew so little about the job he was supposed to undertake as groundsman. Still, a job was a job, and he knew how to take care of the grounds of a very sizable property. It was a job he could easily do, providing, of course, he applied himself and worked very hard. But it was hardly rocket science, was it? With all that in mind, Marcus prepared to leave the apartment block in the Upper East Side of Manhattan at St. James and say his farewells to Tallister the cat. And for him this was an emotional goodbye, as Tallister had been his only real friend while he'd been living in New York. "I'm going to miss you, Tallister," he said, stroking the cat affectionately. "I wish you were coming along with me, but sadly you belong to somebody else." Later that day he informed the landlord, Leonard de la Mare, that he would be leaving for good. But Leonard de la Mare didn't seem to really care, and said just simply, "Thank you very much for notifying me on this matter, Mr. Devaney. I would very much appreciate it if you would leave the apartment as you found it for the next person who rents out the place." And Marcus did just that, scrubbing the place within an inch of his life, so that the apartment block at St. James, well, the apartment that he had occupied, was left in reasonably good condition for the next tenant. Marcus packed up the old antiquated suitcase where he'd found the lucky coins that had changed his life with that spontaneous telephone call to Zach O'Rourke. It had swung the pendulum of his future far away from this dingy, oppressive apartment block that he was sure he was never ever going to miss, apart from Tallister the cat, of course. Marcus's rather beleaguered suitcase proudly contained all his worldly possessions, which were so minimal, as Marcus had been unable to buy any more clothes since he'd come to New York. So the fact that his suitcase seemed alarmingly heavy came as quite the surprise for him. Who knew a few clothes could weigh so much? It felt like he was carrying a stone in his suitcase. In the true custom of the day, Marcus hitchhiked all the way to Clayton Manor. As after the war people were kindly disposed to giving people lifts, everyone was in good spirits about the future, believing that America's economy was on the precipice of shortly welcoming a big boom that would change people's prospects for good. And most people felt genuinely optimistic about the future after coming through the grievous horrors of war. And in general, helping out a stranger who needed a lift was very commonplace. "You're going to Clayton Manor, are you, young man?" asked the man who was driving Marcus on the last part of the trip, as he had hitchhiked rides with 3 other drivers along the way. The man who'd stopped to pick him up was driving a dark-coloured, wireless overland jeep. "Where are you going to, young man?" he had asked Marcus. "A place called Clayton Manor," Marcus had told him. "I'm the new groundskeeper for the property there." "Get in, then," said the kind man. "I'll take you directly to the Clayton Manor myself. As it happens, I live a hair's breadth away from the manor, so it's on my driving route." "That is incredibly kind of you, sir," said Marcus, settling down comfortably into the seat, after placing his suitcase in the trunk. "I'm very grateful for the lift." The man offered Marcus a cough lozenge, which he refused politely. "No thanks, but thank you anyway," he said. "They're a nice cherry flavour, you know," said the man. "I always find when I'm driving they soothe a dry throat." "So you know Clayton Manor?" asked Marcus politely. "You were saying you don't live far away from the place." "Ah, I know Clayton Manor very well, but only in passing as it happens. I regularly do take the very bad road, because it's a short-cut to my house. Unfortunately, the road is infested with potholes, but I hope the authorities will fix it up soon enough. I hasten to say the God-forsaken place, I'm talking about Clayton Manor, of course, has been empty and derelict for years. I'm surprised you've been given a job there, quite frankly, as groundskeeper. I don't even know who owns the place anymore. But I suspect the manor still belongs to a member of the O'Rourke family. The manor's been in their possession for generations, from what I'm given to understand. But why it's never been sold, God only knows. I rather suspect that it has something to do with the demands of an original old-fashioned will going back to the 1800s. That probably was insistent the manor remained in the O'Rourke family for generations, unless, of course, the circumstances were somewhat extenuating. I will say this to you. I don't envy you working there. I've heard a rather unsettling story about the manor, from my next-door neighbour, Cole Armstrong, that, well, let's just say over the years, has certainly given me pause for thought. Marcus was intrigued, and encouraged the man to go on. Well, the place has been neglected for a long time. So actually, if the truth be told, I'm rather glad someone has been hired to clean the place up. And with your being employed as a groundskeeper for the extensive property, that, I must tell you, is nestled on a sizable amount of land, is, let's just say, a promising start. The property has been so wild and untamed. Well, it's become that way over the years. It's a sorry sight for sore eyes, let me tell you, in its current neglected, forsaken condition. I dare say no one would want to buy a place like that. Indeed, some people might think the place deserves a wrecking ball throwing at it. Something less sinister, for example, being erected in its place, perhaps. My wife Daisy thinks Clayton Manor is menacing, to say the very least. She's actually convinced the place is haunted. But I don't believe in such things. But I can see where she's coming from in that, when she says such a thing. By all accounts, with all the burgeoning vines creeping all over the grey walls, it doesn't only look extremely unkempt, but seriously sinister. You're going to have quite a job on your hands, bringing the manor back to some form of respectability, if indeed that is at all possible. As my wife Daisy says, you simply can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. Mind you, having said that, my neighbour Cole Armstrong is most insistent that Clayton Manor was one of the most desirable properties in these parts, hosting some of the most grandiose parties for the most affluent in our society, the movers and shakers of our day, so to speak. Some say Winston Churchill attended a party at Clayton Manor, but whether this is true I do not know. The man gave Marcus a warm smile, but his expression immediately fell when he could see the rising look of alarm on Marcus's face, caused by his impromptu words that had been so loosely spoken. The driver, who was a rotund man in his early 60s, with a cheery round face, a distinguished bushy moustache, and a very thin layer of brown hair around the base of his scalp, complemented by a bald space at the very top that was somewhat shiny, had realized he'd caused his passenger a measure of undue disquiet. He was silent for a brief moment, as if reflecting on what to say to redeem himself. He seemed to regret speaking such truths out loud. He nodded soberly, his expression growing more solemn by the second. "Don't worry, young man, about what I've just said. My wife Daisy is always telling me that I talk far too much for my own good. She says if I were a woman I'd be considered a gossip, with a garrulous reputation, but sometimes I just can't help myself. For the record, I didn't mean to cause you undue alarm with my ruminations about Clayton Manor. Take no notice of them. I probably don't even know what the hell I'm talking about. As far as I'm concerned, a job is a job, even though I don't say it lightly that you have a job on your hands cleaning the place up. It's become exceedingly run down over the years, but that is what you can expect if you don't maintain a property." The driver shrugged his shoulders, albeit a little nonchalantly. "Maybe the story I've heard from my next-door neighbour, Cole Armstrong, in regards to Clayton Manor, is highly exaggerated. Sometimes people will do anything to spin a good yarn, won't they? It's human nature to enjoy being spooked. My wife Daisy loves a good old ghost story, as much as the next person," he said with a chuckle, glancing at Marcus through his round spectacles that accentuated the hazel colour of his eyes. "You mark my words, there is probably no truth to the story at all. I wouldn't worry about it if I were you." "What story are you talking about?" asked Marcus abruptly, sitting up on the leather seat, so straight that his back looked as erect as a pencil. As a rather unfortunate electrical prickle of dread seemed to run down his spine. "What story, sir?" he repeated again, his face whitening, the colour draining from his skin, as he privately wondered what it was he was getting himself into. Had he made a grievous mistake taking this job at Clayton Manor from a man he'd never met before called Zach O'Rourke, who by the sounds of things was probably the owner of Clayton Manor? The driver whom he'd hitched a lift from was telling him that the manor was in a bad state of repair, with extensive grounds that by the sounds of things had grown wild and unkempt. So if indeed this was true, it looked like the job that Marcus had undertaken was going to require a lot of grueling hard work. But Marcus wasn't remotely afraid of that. He was used to cleaning up the thickets and thorny briars in his mother's yard in Tennessee, and bringing about an enviable, rather dignified respectability to the place, and he would do much the same for Clayton Manor, he was most sure. "You really want to know?" said the man, who Marcus discovered called himself Edward Kingston. He and his wife Daisy had lived in this rural location near Clayton Manor for over 15 long years. So any insight that Edward Kingston might have on Clayton Manor, Marcus knew might be to his advantage, and would be rather invaluable to hear, even if what the man had to say might be a tad unsettling, or even wildly fictitious. He hoped the latter was indeed the case, and reluctantly braced himself by clenching his stomach muscles tightly together and drawing in a deep breath. He needed to hear what Edward Kingston had to say about the place that was soon to become his home, if he finally became the groundskeeper for Clayton Manor, providing of course that Zach O'Rourke was completely satisfied with his work, and with the pay being so desirable, Marcus had reasoned, even if it killed him, he'd bring some order to the place. He didn't fancy living hand to mouth as he had done for so long, with some nights going hungry, when he'd not found work for the day. Harry Truman had been assuring everyone that things were going to get better with the economy. It was true. Marcus was most sure, as many could taste and smell the fragrant essence of prosperity in the air, as if it was a possibility that could be attained. But at this time, as far as Marcus was concerned, it was a slow trickle that hopefully in time would turn into a waterfall of abundance for so many people in America. Nevertheless, with hope in the air, the energy in America had never been more positive, and Marcus intended to harness this upbeat energy to make the most of his life. And this attitude of his resonated with many. Whatever Edward Kingston had to say, he hoped it would not be bad enough to sever his hope for the promising future he hoped to grab with both of his hands. For he had dreamed of going back to Tennessee with handfuls of cash and making his mother so proud as a consequence. Marcus really wanted to give back to his mother, who had given him so much, in sacrificing some of her teenage years to devoting her time in raising him, when she could have easily given him up for adoption. But his mother had been resolutely determined to bring him up as her own, and Marcus was eternally grateful to her for that. Marcus watched Edward Kingston cautiously turn the steering wheel around a sharp bend in the road that was in a very bad state of repair after the war, pitted with pockmarks, potholes and dents. Edward Kingston was wearing a very dashing pair of driving gloves, in a mustard colour. The whole car juddered and shook as it hit all the bumps down a long country road that would finally ultimately lead to Clayton Manor. The road really was in a terrible state, but Edward Kingston assured Marcus that the United States Bureau of Roads had been notified about the problem, as properties in the area, although rural in location, were affluent and owned by people with prestige and money, and often considered to be second homes. It was speculated in the next year or so that the road would indeed be fixed up. For a moment Edward did not speak, and the silence was rather deafening, as Marcus inwardly wrestled with a series of troubled thoughts that he did not want to be entertaining. The words that Edward Kingston had recently spouted, rather like water from a gardener's hose, kept spinning around and around in his head. What have I got myself into? He wondered. For a moment he almost regretted giving his notice in to Leonard de la Mare, who had probably already given his apartment at St. James to somebody else by now. He could hardly go back to the Lower East Side of Manhattan and beg the man to change his mind, just because he'd suddenly had a rather alarming attack of the heebie-jeebies, like an outbreak of hives. Then there was Talister the cat to consider, that Marcus had grown to love, and even though it had only been a few hours on this journey since he'd said his cheery goodbyes to his furry friend, he was already missing the cat. He was now paddling around furiously in a sea of regret. Was coming here to Clayton Manor a big mistake? He was rather beginning to think it just might be. And why was he missing that damned cat? He was annoyed with himself for growing so attached to Talister. His mother had warned him about such things, told him not to bond with animals you couldn't keep, because you'd end up with a broken heart. Marcus felt a nagging tug at his heart as he thought affectionately of Talister. He wondered where she was now. She was probably basking in the sun on the couch in Marcus's apartment that now belonged to somebody else by now. Would the new owner of the apartment bond with Talister, like he had done, he wondered. Finally Edward abruptly broke the internal dialogue that was going on in Marcus's mind, and spoke. Perhaps it's best I don't tell you about what it is believed that happened at the manor, as of course it may not be true. We all know from experience that some stories can get wildly out of hand and completely over the top, and I have a sense that this might be one of them. Marcus noticed he said this with little conviction, as whatever this story was that concerned Clayton Manor, there was no doubt in Marcus's mind that Edward Kingston believed every word of it to be true, but had masterfully sewn an element of doubt into the equation in order to allay any fears that Marcus might currently experience on hearing the story. Edward Kingston shrugged his shoulders and said rather gingerly, The last thing I want to do is to cause you undue upset before you start your new job at the manor. It would not be a courteous thing of me to do. Indeed, if my wife Daisy were to hear me now, and to hear that I'd told you this rather outlandish story, she would be the first to give me a good old clobbering around the ear, let me tell you. And that feisty wife of mine can be quite the tyrant when she wants to be, he said teasingly. I've always liked women with a bit of spirit, and my wife is one of those. I'm a glutton for punishment, it would seem. I would rather know what you've heard about the place, rather than being left in the dark, if you don't mind. Even if the story is nothing but a rumour. I would like to know everything you can tell me, said Marcus rather coyly, who by now was nervously grinding his teeth together with an agitated trepidation. Very well, I will tell you, said Edward Kingston. Now that I've opened a can of worms, I better let you see them all, hadn't I? Let's just say the story happened 20 years ago. Me and my wife Daisy were not living in this rural location in New York State at the time, as this story happened 5 years before me and my wife Daisy moved to this part of the world. We were very glad we laid roots down here. We bought for ourselves a delightful Georgian house in the countryside, not far from Clayton Manor. And during the war we grew our own vegetables, kept a couple of milking cows and some hens. We had it good, better than most, I rather suspect. We certainly went through tough times as a country, but let's just say the war and all its atrocities brought upon by Hitler has made me feel so grateful for the lives we have now, which I'm sure will only get considerably better. Who knew one could celebrate peace like this? I will never ever forget the day when the war was truly over, how everyone was cheering in the streets of New York. We came together that day as a nation, and it was the most euphoric experience I have ever felt. New York was filled with crowds and crowds of the happiest people you have ever seen, waving their handkerchiefs furiously, and American flags were everywhere. Anyway, look at me. I'm rambling on and on again. It's hard to stay on topic. What was it that I was saying? I've clean forgotten. Ah, yes, I remember now. Our next-door neighbour, a very debonair gentleman called Cole Armstrong, who lives in the Georgian property next door to mine, not terribly far from Clayton Manor. Well, let's just say he told me the entire story. I will tell you this about my neighbour Cole Armstrong, and that is he is a military man that was heavily involved in the war project. He is highly decorated, and I've only known him to be a man of utmost integrity. He has met up with Churchill 6 times, I'm told, in an advisory capacity, that is. He told me himself that Churchill was quite the comedian. The man, I believe, has a remarkable sense of humour, although I hasten to say I've never been privy to meeting him myself, although I wish I had. Cole told me quite a few jokes that Churchill had said over dinner one night in London that he attended. He said after a couple of drinks Churchill would make everyone crack up with laughter. And he certainly boosted morale during those bleak times, let me tell you, when people were feeling defeated and washed out by the war. You need a leader like that when you're facing adversity. And Churchill, well, he was one of the finest, was he not? Oh, he was. I believe all this is true, agreed Marcus with a laugh. I mean that Churchill had a good sense of humour, that is. I remember reading in the paper once, I think it was either the New York Star, or maybe it was the People's Voice. I'm not sure which paper exactly. But the article said that when Lady Astor once told Churchill after he'd spent a night drinking a little too much, and was inebriated, that he was hardly able to stand up straight, and was walking with quite the wobble, that he should be ashamed of himself because he was as drunk as a skunk. I gather she was quite the formidable taskmaster, incredibly mediocre, they say, in every sense of the word. The kind of woman that was constantly known for her nagging. The type of woman you never end up marrying, because if you do, you're going to be seriously henpecked. Those are the kind of women you avoid like the plague, and sadly Miss Astor is one of them. He told her in no uncertain terms, I might be drunk, Miss Astor, but at least in the morning I will be sober, but you will still be ugly. Edward Kingston rolled his head back and laughed. That's Churchill for you all over. He's always been very good, extremely witty, at those famous one-liners. No doubt he will go down in history as one of Britain's supreme prime ministers. Anyway, as I was saying, Cole Armstrong, my next-door neighbour, knew Philip O'Rourke extremely well. He said that at the time they were as close as brothers. One day Philip O'Rourke phoned up my neighbour in quite the state. I understand that Philip was quite an opinionated man, who had strong feelings about things, and never suffered fools gladly. Cole Armstrong eloquently described Philip O'Rourke as the kind of man you would want in a wartime situation, to boost the morale of the troops. He was a natural-born leader, although he didn't have a sense of humour like Churchill invariably did. He was much more serious about things, but he had it all together, and more importantly of all, he was not given to panic. So for Cole to say so many complimentary things about this man, I knew that Philip O'Rourke must have been a tough cookie, and someone who demanded a great deal of respect. Cole Armstrong would never be idle with compliments like that. On this occasion, when my neighbour spoke to Philip O'Rourke, who had phoned him from a New York address, where he had a brownstone apartment, as a second property, he was telling Cole that regretfully he had to cancel the card game they had planned for that evening, because he would not be making an appearance, as he was not in the immediate area any more, and would not be returning to Clayton Manor any time soon in the future, if at all. Cole Armstrong, my neighbour, was stunned and taken aback by these baffling revelations from his good friend. Philip sounded like a man who had been through some stuff, and was deeply troubled about something, if you know what I mean. It was a big deal for the O'Rourke family to just up and leave the manor like that, without so much as a by your leave. It was completely out of character for them. So to spontaneously, impulsively leave as they did, without any due consideration and careful thought, was very strange indeed. I do know that Philip O'Rourke's wife Monica was devastated to leave her beloved home, with their 2 sons, Zack and Eli, which were their names. I've got a good memory on things like that, when it comes to supercilious stuff. So getting back to the conversation that my neighbour Cole Armstrong had with Philip O'Rourke on the phone that day. Well, he described Philip as being rather flustered, and certainly out of sorts, and he'd never known him to be like that. So he demanded to know what the hell was going on with his good friend. And let's just say Philip O'Rourke crumbled rather like a cookie and told him the entire story. He kept saying to Cole over and over again, "I know you're not going to believe me, but I promise you it's true." Ironically, Cole Armstrong didn't doubt for a second that Philip O'Rourke was telling him the whole truth, because he'd never known the man to lie before. And based on how disquieted and affrighted his good friend had become, he knew this was no fairy tale, even if it did sound exceedingly far-fetched. So something bad did happen at Clayton Manor, for the family to up and leave like that, said Marcus reflectively. How awful! By the sounds of things, they were extremely attached to the manor. It seems such a dreadful pity to abandon a place that you've lived in for so many years, and let a place of such esteem descend into rampant ruin. It's a tragedy any way that you look at it. You say Philip O'Rourke told you the whole story as to why the family abandoned the manor, did you not? Yes, he did tell me the whole story. He told Cole Armstrong everything, and he didn't spare any details. I think he was glad to confide in someone he could trust, who wouldn't think he'd lost his mind like many might believe. It's interesting you should mention that one of Philip O'Rourke's sons was called Zack, said Marcus reflectively, because when I phoned up to answer the advertisement that I saw on a piece of pink stock card, I have to tell you, the man that answered the telephone to my advertisement was called Zack O'Rourke. So I imagine that was Philip O'Rourke's son, who is all grown up by now. Well, there you go then, said Edward, looking satisfied. That confirms to me that Clayton Manor still belongs to the O'Rourke family, which means they never sold the place, which I rather suspected was the case. Philip O'Rourke is Zack's father, and it would seem from what you've been implying that he's more than lightly handed the property over to his son, as I doubt that Philip wants anything to do with the place, given what happened to him. I suppose Zack O'Rourke must have fond memories of the manor, having spent most of his childhood there, so the place must be wistfully nostalgic for him. I imagine he probably wants to fix the place up, if he's now advertising for a groundskeeper, and it's about time too, if you ask me. Ostensibly the O'Rourkes have owned the property for generations, and I believe Clayton O'Rourke, the original owner back in the 1800s, must have been desirous for the beloved manor to remain in the O'Rourke family, going through the generations, which makes sense to me. That's why the place, I imagine, has never ever been put up for sale. I told you I suspected this was all down to the legality of an old-fashioned will, and it certainly seems I might be right on that one. But whether I am or not, many in these parts will agree with me that they will be glad to see Clayton Manor finally fixed up after the war. Ironically, there are other houses in these parts that didn't fare at all well when the war was in progress. People simply couldn't afford the upkeep of their large houses. But times are luckily changing fast, and several houses I've seen round and about the place have already got scaffolding up and are commercing with building projects and much-needed renovations. So it's all a positive start, is it not? There's a great atmosphere for change in America of late. I feel it wherever I go. I feel it too, Marcus agreed. And it's the same in New York, by the way. I've seen a lot of scaffolding around and about the buildings, and I can see they're fixing up office blocks everywhere I go. It's a shame our landlord Leonard de la Mare cannot learn from their example. Good Lord! You know Leonard de la Mare? Asked Edward Kingston, looking rather surprised. Nasty weasel he is. I've seen him around and about. He's stinking rich, but you probably know that already. Never had to work a single day in his life, you know. Well, not really. He inherited all his wealth from his father, who was big in shipping, I believe. That man owns so many properties that he lets out to his tenants, but he can easily afford to fix them all up. But he allows his tenants to live in atrocious, unspeakable conditions. I'm told that he's too damn mean and far too tight to spend money on improving his properties. He should be ashamed of himself. But I don't think he'll get away with letting out apartments in that condition for much longer. The authorities will be on to him once they've undergone safety inspections. Then he'll be forced to dip into his pockets to fix up some of the abominations he owns. I'm relieved to hear you say that, said Marcus. The rat problem on the premises where I lived was getting way too out of control, and I'm afraid Leonard de la Mare did not do a thing about it. Doesn't surprise me at all, said Edward Kingston, snorting in disgust. Some people don't deserve to have money. Never liked that weasel at all. Now let me get back to the story. I seem to be getting sidetracked all over again. Where was I? You were talking about why the O'Rourke family up and left Clayton Manor very suddenly. You mentioned that your neighbour, Cole Kingston, claimed his friend Philip O'Rourke had been very disquieted about something when speaking to him on the telephone. Ah, that's right. Well, put simply, Philip O'Rourke lived at Clayton Manor very happily with his entire family. I understand they hosted many grand parties at the manor over the years. Philip's wife Monica was quite the social butterfly, and I was given to understand was also a very beautiful woman who could have her pick of men. But let's just say Philip O'Rourke came from a distinguished upper-crust family at the time. The couple enjoyed the benefits of employing a few servants that lived on the property in the servants' quarters, which was another wing in the house. Monica was domesticated by nature and enjoyed cooking, so was actively involved in working with the domestic staff, of which she had half a dozen. But they did cut down on the staff over the years, as Monica O'Rourke didn't want her house overtaken with too many servants. She liked to feel she had an element of control in running things, although she definitely needed help in a place as big as Clayton Manor. That's most sure. One day, very suddenly, the O'Rourke family began experiencing what I can only describe as paradoxical events that they simply could not explain. One of the servant girls, who was in charge of overseeing all the laundry, claimed she'd seen a monster staring at her through the laundry room window in the house. She then claimed that the monster had been watching her from the woods as she hung out the laundry. She was so affrighted by this thing she claimed to have seen. So afraid was she that she promptly handed in her resignation. Fear drove her away from working for the O'Rourkes. In truth, the O'Rourkes rather thought the girl was somewhat unhinged, out of her mind, so to speak, a little mentally unbalanced, perhaps. In truth, I rather suspect that they were secretly glad she had been relieved of her duties. But two more of the servants' girls also suddenly, enigmatically gave in their resignations for no reasons at all, after working with the family laundry. Whether they saw something is anybody's guess, but it would be reasonable to expect that this indeed was the case. But they spoke nothing of their experiences, possibly for fear of ridicule, and just claimed they wanted to leave their jobs. One day Monica O'Rourke decided to take charge of the laundry. She had lost 3 servants already, who had suddenly handed in their notice, so someone had to oversee the laundry for her. Monica O'Rourke began attending to the washing, in the laundry room herself, sorting out the whites from the colours. She claimed she'd seen a strange face staring at her through the laundry window, with big yellow eyes. This humanoid creature was covered in hair, and seemed to be substantial in size. She said his head was so incredibly large, it took up the entire window, and the creature seemed to be crouching as it peered in at her, which suggested he must be exceedingly large. She said the creature, although intimidating, looked at her curiously, but the experience had significantly affrighted her, because she had no idea what it was she'd seen. Perhaps all 3 servant girls who resigned one after another may more than likely have been privy to witnessing the yellow eyes and the strange, unorthodox, human-like face staring at them through the laundry room window. Mrs. O'Rourke told her husband Philip what she had seen. He didn't believe a word of it, of course, claiming that the original servant girl who'd left their employ had put wild fancies into his wife's head that didn't resemble the truth, and had probably successfully afflicted the other 2 female servants in their employ with similar fictitious trepidations that had no bearing on reality whatsoever. He went on to say, rather pompously, that women, being emotional by nature, had the propensity to indulge their imaginations rather too much when it suited them, but men honoured only facts and were not easily seduced by wild fantasies created by an overactive, very impressionable imagination. Monica was naturally affronted that her husband Philip was so dismissive towards her encounter. It bothered her greatly that he failed to believe her. So when she saw the face at the laundry room window for a second time, she didn't panic. She believed the creature looking in at her through the window was non-aggressive, and had actually smiled at her, so she was not as afraid as the other servants in her employ had naturally been. She decided not to tell Philip about it, over concerns of him going off on a tangent about her imagination, burgeoning out of control like a wild vine. Soon after Monica O'Rourke's bizarre sightings of a face at the window, which appeared to her on several occasions, when she took charge over the laundry, she claimed every time she was hanging out the washing on the line that she had a profound sense that she was being watched, and was sure she'd seen an ambiguously vague figure in the woodgrove, a dark silhouette, humongous in size, that she could not actually identify, as it was far too shadowy, so she wasn't sure if what she'd seen had actually just been a trick of the light. But she was certain that whatever had possessed the brazen gumption to spy on her in the laundry room was now indeed watching her surreptitiously behind a large oak tree in the grove. The couple recently began to hear a song being sung in the woods, always at night, in a foreign language. Every night they would look at each other and say, well, at least Monica would say, "What the hell was that, Philip?" Philip O'Rourke would answer and say, "God only knows, but I'm not about to find out what that is." By this time, Monica O'Rourke, who was now in charge of all the washing, because the 3 servant girls that still remained in her employ had failed to do a satisfactory job, so Mrs. O'Rourke took over. She was very particular and fastidious about how she liked things to be done. She certainly had the attitude that if you don't like the way something is done, then do it yourself, and so the washing became her full-time responsibility. Every time Monica O'Rourke hung the washing on the line, she absolutely knew without a shadow of a doubt that she was being watched. Shortly after she hung the washing up, items of her clothing would mysteriously go walkabout from the washing line, such as silk slips, pantyhose, cotton tops, and skirts. At first she was maddened by all this, wondering where the hell her washing had got to. But on doing a frantic search of the grounds on the property, she found a rather enigmatic, curious trail of stones leading directly into the woods, so she decided to follow them, and stumbled across her select items of washing, dangling from low-hung tree branches in the grove, and of course on the occasional bush. The clothes were not damaged, nor were they soiled in any way, but had obviously been on quite the adventure. On many occasions Mrs. O'Rourke had to go and collect her washings like this from the woods, where she'd follow again another trail of stones that would lead to where her washing was hiding. It became like a game of hide and seek for her. She noticed that only her clothes were targeted, for this game, so to speak. As it would seem, her husband's and children's clothes remained untouched, hanging on the washing line to dry. They were never targeted. She had a sense the creature she had seen at the laundry room, peering in at her through mischievous yellow eyes, was toying with her. She claimed that when she went to retrieve her washing, splayed across bushes and God knows where else, she'd hear an amused chuckle, as if something was laughing at her. She knew she was being watched, but she kept these remarkably unique experiences to herself, for she knew how cynical a man her husband Philip could be. Finally, she did come clean and tell him what was happening with her washing, when Philip discovered a pathway of stones leading into the woods and demanded to know what the kids were playing at, as he thought it was one of their games, and wasn't desperately amused by it. I guess by then Monica felt compelled to tell Philip the truth. She didn't want her children being blamed for something they invariably did not do. Her rather bizarre story left her bewildered husband extremely confounded. He made a thorough search of the woodgrove with a rifle in his hands during the daylight hours, but saw nothing was amiss, although he did say he had an ominous feeling that something was watching him. One night Philip O'Rourke had become increasingly frustrated by the strange voice singing in the woods, because they heard it again. Hakinatilamp, akilatasi, haminatolo. And even though he had previously insisted he would never go out in the dead of night to check it out, it's amazing how bold you can become after enjoying a tipple or two. I hasten to say that his wife Monica rather suspected the smiling face with the yellow eyes that she'd often seen staring at her through the laundry window was the owner of the voice that was singing at night. Her husband was consumed with a bold assertiveness after having a couple of drinks, so he decided to find the source of the singing. Monica O'Rourke believed that a couple of shots of alcohol had given her husband Philip a fake sense of confidence, which he would not doubtlessly have had he been stone-cold sober. That's drink for you, though, isn't it? It can give you what they call Dutch courage. Naturally, Monica O'Rourke was alarmed her husband was going to investigate the strange singing from the woods, and discouraged him not to go, feeling very apprehensive about her husband's impulsive urge to suddenly investigate, which became like an itch he suddenly wanted to scratch. From what Cole Armstrong told me about Philip O'Rourke, despite being an honourable man, he had flaws to his character, and one of them, I'm afraid to say, was that by nature he was mulishly stubborn, and he refused to listen to his wife's seasoned advice whenever it was given to him. On the contrary, the more she urged him to please not go into the woods, the more determined he would ultimately become to do just that. This, I suspect, was due to a rather rebellious, cantankerous side to his character that did not serve his very best interests, for people like that can so easily find themselves caught up in trouble, like a fly entangled in a spider's web. It would seem Philip O'Rourke boldly sashayed into the woods that night, with a confident swagger, according to his wife Monica, that is. She nervously watched him from behind the twitching curtains in the living room. You can only imagine what was going on in that poor woman's mind at the time. I suspect she didn't want any harm to come to the creature that she had encountered, who she strongly suspected was responsible for the nightly singing. She did confess to her husband Philip she always believed the creature that she'd seen in the laundry-room window was harmless, and was probably him singing in the woods, and to please leave him well alone. But Philip O'Rourke's obstinacy appeared to have grown legs of its own. This was a night of a full moon, and let's just say Philip O'Rourke, armed with his rifle and torch, went marching into the woodgrove like a man going off to war in pursuit of a deadly enemy that he doggedly intended to take down and destroy. It was here, on searching for the source of the bizarre singing, the family appeared to keep hearing, that Philip O'Rourke had an unorthodox cryptic encounter of his own, with the same gargantuan creature his wife had often seen at the laundry-room window. He said the creature was humongous in size, but very human-like, covered in long, dark, flowing hair. Indeed, I am told he was so taken aback by this brief, outlandish encounter that for a second he was so caught off guard and could not believe what he was seeing. He even wondered if he might possibly be dreaming. The creature seemed equally as startled to run into the likes of Philip O'Rourke at the dead of night. The creature stared at him and said, "Onkolotina, hakika swana," which translated into his head as, "Yes, I'm real. Don't look so surprised about it." It was as if the creature had read Philip's mind. The creature simply walked away through the woods, not even glancing over his ponderous shoulders once to give Philip O'Rourke a second glance. Philip O'Rourke claimed that any thoughts of using his rifle on this occasion had passed him by, but in hindsight he regretted that decision and wished he'd pulled the trigger on the hairy humanoid. He was feeling absolutely convinced that this wild man of sorts was obviously imposing a substantial threat to his family, as it had willfully stolen his wife's washing from the lion and put it around the woods. That made him as mad as hell. From what I gather, the man had absolutely no sense of humour, and felt his wife Monica was being targeted by the creature. Ostensibly, Monica told him to leave the creature be. She said that the man-like beast intended them no harm. If that were indeed the case, she assured Philip that the creature would likely have harmed the family a long time ago. She said the little incidents with the washing was the creature's way of messing around with her as a joke. She advised her husband not to antagonize the creature, should he ever encounter the creature in the woods again, and never to fire at it, as no good could come from such a fruitless endeavour. She said she'd grown rather fond and amused by the games the creature played on her, which she thought were rather playful and sweet. Philip O'Rourke would not listen to a word his wife said. He told her he meant to kill the creature, whether she liked it or not. And Monica told him that if he did such a foolish thing, he might very well live to regret such a decision. If this creature is approached by you, and you intend to harm it, I feel very sorry for you, Philip, because you're going to be in serious trouble. You're putting yourself in harm's way, she insisted, and it might not end well for all of us. I think the creature is completely harmless. I'm sorry, but I do. I can tell by the eyes that it's actually a kind creature. But if he realizes you intend to blow his head off, I don't think he's going to remain harmless. If you whack a domesticated dog too many times, he might come back to bite you, but it doesn't change the fact that the dog is domesticated. But it knows how to stand up for itself. The creature, I'm sure, is much the same. Please, I beg you, Philip, don't do anything stupid. Allow the creature to coexist with the rest of our family. He's not doing any harm to anyone. He's obviously incredibly intelligent, and he's got a sense of humour. And what's wrong with that? He enjoys playing games with me. So what? There's nothing sinister about any of this, I can assure you of that. You stupid woman, Mr. O'Rourke scolded his wife. Haven't you heard a single word I've just said? Or are you really completely tone-deaf and dumb? The man-like creature I encountered in the woods was intimidating, incredibly big. He imposes a grave threat to our family. You think it's all fun and games, don't you, Monica? Just because the creature puts lines of stones for you to follow to lead you to your washing. Can't you see? He's making a mockery of all of us. Even if he didn't attack me in the woods that evening, how do we know he will remain indifferent towards us? Long terms, things can dramatically change, can they not? The creature is stealing your washing, hanging it around the wood grove as a joke, and you say he's not harming us? Are you absolutely insane? He's interfering in our lives, woman. Don't you get it? And I, for one, cannot and will not tolerate that. I'm sorry, but I just won't. I need to put my foot down here on this. I'm sorry if you've got attached to this thing, God knows why, but that thing is going to go, if I have any say in this matter. Oh, goodness gracious, Philip, listen to yourself. Don't be so foolish. Be like what? What are you accusing me of, Monica? Well, being so dogmatic, so opinionated about things that you know absolutely nothing about. Just let the creature be. He's never harmed any of us. Need I remind you, Monica, that this creature initially has spied on 3 of our servant girls through the window of the laundry room. That's why they all handed in their notices, because they were so affrighted by this thing. It's a botheration and an annoyance, if anything else. He's like a damn mosquito that you need to swat away. I can't believe that none of this is a botheration to you. You saw him looking at you through the laundry room window on several occasions, and you have the blatant audacity to nonchalantly wave your hands around in the air as if it's no big deal. What if this creature comes after one of our boys, Monica? Have you thought about that for a second? You're their mother, for God's sake. It's your responsibility to take care of our children, as it is mine. If anything were to happen to them, their blood would be on your hands. Oh, listen to yourself. Don't be ridiculous, Philip. You're being ever so dramatic. I'm a naturally protective mother, and if I remotely suspected for a single second that this hairy man-like creature intended to hurt our children, I would be the first one to actively encourage you to go after him with all guns blazing. In fact, I would demand that of you, and wouldn't expect anything less. You do surprise me saying that, Monica. You're being incredibly nonchalant about all of this. That's because I've got very good instincts about things. I'm telling you, Philip, the creature is benevolent. But let me warn you, if you mess around with him, he may not remain that way. Need I remind you, our children are always playing out in the woods, and nothing bad or nefarious has ever happened to them. Not once. Never have they been unduly alarmed by anything. You yourself encountered the creature in the woods who told you yes, he was real and to get over it. I want to tell you, Philip, if he'd wanted to hurt you, he had plenty of opportunity to do so, but he didn't, did he? That should tell you he imposes no threat. Don't be ridiculous. Of course the creature imposes a threat. Well, I disagree on that, Philip. If he reads your mind, it means he's intelligent. But maybe he's just curious and interested in our family. He enjoys playing tricks on me with the washing. When I go and collect my washing from the woods, I hear him laughing. It's a game for him, a harmless game. Just like the kids enjoy playing jokes on me. He's harmless, love, as I keep repeating over and over again. But you simply refuse to listen to a single word I say. That's because nothing you say, love, makes any bloody sense at all. You're talking absolute nonsense. Oh, you are being crazy, Philip. What I'm saying does make sense. You know what your problem is, Philip. You're too damned obstinate for your own good. If you want my salient advice, which I'm sure you don't, but I'm going to say it anyway, whether you like it or not, I would not antagonize the creature with a weapon if I were you. And I would hate you to attempt to kill him. I mean, what has he ever done to you? I can't believe we're having this foolhardy, ridiculous conversation, love. You're the one that has clearly lost your marbles, not me. What has he done? I'll tell you what he's done. He's been going after you with your washing, spying on you in the laundry room. This has got to stop. That's what he's done. Oh, don't be so ridiculous, Philip. Honestly, you really are ranting now about everything and nothing. Think about things reasonably for a second. Should you attempt to kill this somewhat unorthodox man-like creature, he could become like a cornered dog and lash out if he feels threatened. And God forbid that happens. Things could turn nasty very quickly, let me tell you. And you can't say, Philip, that I haven't warned you on this. And what if the worst were to happen, and the creature actually killed you? That would leave me without a husband and our children without a father. Do you want to do that to them? Do you want to do that to me? Have you thought about any of this for a second? You seem to believe because you carry a weapon on your person that you have the edge over this creature. But you don't. You're deluding yourself on this one. You don't know what you're talking about, Monica. I'm the man of the house. I know exactly what I'm doing. Not like this, Philip, you don't, Monica had insisted. But I'm afraid her words sadly fell on deaf ears. Philip O'Rourke was bloody-minded, opinionated, and wilfully contrary, but I'm quite sure you've gathered as much. If it weren't for him, the O'Rourke family may never have left Clayton Manor in the first place, and I would likely not be telling you this story. But alas, Philip O'Rourke was messing around with something he could not understand. So invariably it did come back to bite him, as Monica had warned. It was because of the consequence of his foolish actions. The O'Rourke family, well, they had their lives turned upside down, and they were forced to leave Clayton Manor against their will. Oh dear, said Marcus. Sounds to me that Philip O'Rourke was taking on something far too sophisticated than he himself was even aware of. Very well put, agreed Edward Kingston. Anyway, on that night when Monica watched Philip O'Rourke heading out into the woodgrove yet again to go after the hairy humanoid, after they'd heard him singing in the woods, Monica was most sure this time that things would not end well, but she was powerless to stop the impulsiveness of her obstinate husband. She was shaking her head sorrowfully as she observed him marching into the woods, and wondered to herself if she'd ever see him again. Philip O'Rourke knocked back a couple of stiff shots of whisky, and then sauntered off into the woods, armed with a rifle and torch. I guess he needed all the Dutch courage he could get, if he intended to take down a huge creature like this, that could so easily snap his neck off as quickly as a piece of peanut brittle. I think poor Monica was all too aware of this unsettling fact. But alas, Philip was heading straight into the danger zone, and he didn't even appear to know it. Goodness gracious me, said Marcus. Philip O'Rourke was exceedingly foolish by the sounds of things. Sometimes it's a whole lot more sensible to let things be. I agree with his wife Monica on this. They should have left the hairy creature well alone. Marcus paused for a moment and then said, Did he find the beast by any chance? I rather suspect that you are going to tell me he did. I hope the story you're telling me doesn't end tragically, but I rather feel that it might, because of the ignorance of a foolhardy man who thought he knew exactly what he was doing, when he clearly did not. Sometimes even a man's vanity can know no bounds. Well said, Edward Kingston agreed, pausing for breath for a second. The story did end dramatically, I can say. Well, according to my neighbour Cole Armstrong. He got onto the phone with Philip O'Rourke. Well, actually, it was Philip O'Rourke who called him first, and that was to cancel a card game that they'd planned for the following evening, that was going to be held in the library at Clayton Manor. Philip promptly informed Cole that the family had up and left Clayton Manor for good, and would be unlikely to be coming back any time soon. He told Cole Armstrong what had happened to him that night, and he didn't spare him any details. Apparently, when Philip O'Rourke entered the woodgrove that night in search of the creature that he intended to take down and kill, he had a profound sense that he was being watched. He guessed it was the creature watching him. It was an overwhelming feeling knowing something was there, and not being able to physically see it. Philip felt exceedingly frustrated. He absolutely knew the creature was watching him. So he boldly called out, "Quit playing games with me. Where are you? I know you're there." He was about to give up on his hot pursuit of the creature, as it was very difficult to hunt down something you can't physically see with your naked eyes, and everything in the woodgrove was sadly lost in the tenebrific shadows. Very suddenly he heard a voice, and there, standing in front of him, was this hairy, human-like creature. Once again the creature was looking steadily at Philip through his yellow eyes, and spoke to him in a language which, against all the odds, Philip appeared to understand. "Compilasika, ha kila san tolo, ham fanasikwana, ha gilani talonok, kasachakwa." You wanted to see me, but your intentions are not good. I see the vindictive malice and vengefulness in your heart that you so obviously hold towards me, and those of my kind, and that is not good." The creature shook his head sadly in that moment. Philip O'Rourke tried to fire at him, but he said he was physically disabled from using his rifle. He simply just could not do it. He claimed his arm had incongruously become paralyzed and stiff. His fingers were all but numb. He knew the creature was responsible for doing this to his arm, and he didn't know how this creature had such power over him. He couldn't fight against this power. He claimed he began to shake like a leaf. His heart was in his mouth, and all he wanted to do was flee away from the woods, because he realized in that moment he was no match for this hairy man, and now he was certain the creature intended to kill him, to extract his ultimate revenge. In fact, he didn't just think it, he was certain of it. The creature spoke to him again, and said, "You came here with the intention of killing me. I won't stand for such violence. I meant you and your family no harm, but you have waged war on me and my kind, and that is not acceptable. In the circumstances, I must demand you leave this land at once. You have no place being here, for although you think you are the owner of this place, it all belongs to me. You are the one encroaching on my territory, and not the other way round. I will thank you to go away from here. If you don't obey my demands, I will kill you myself. You have crossed the boundaries of decency and common sense. I never want to see the likes of you in these parts again. If you are not gone by the morning, I will see to it that you have breathed your very last, for it will take nothing for me to kill you. I could snap off your head with my pinky finger without so much as drawing breath. I have seen your kind before, men that carry weapons of war into the woods to kill the wildlife. And alas, these things you use to take down prey are completely powerless to use against me. For I can read your mind, as if you were an open book, so your corrupt, duplicitous plans are easy to detect and to intercept. I can assure you that you are powerless against the likes of me. Katila kwansi, hom fonshani tulo, hikazi zana swasi kun, hila tila bogolona, nasi nakwani. Now go now before I do something I regret, for I am tempted to throttle you, but I am not given to violence. So I will give you the opportunity to go. But if I find you haven't gone by the morning, you will surely live to regret it." So Philip O'Rourke returned home to his wife Monica, in quite the panic, I have to tell you. I am told he had to drink several stiff whiskies before he finally told her what had happened to him in the woods. The creature had spoken to him and told them to leave at once, and he absolutely knew the creature was not toying with him in any way, and that if he didn't leave the manor as soon as possible, the creature would dispose of him, almost as if he was an old piece of garbage rotting in the refrigerator that needed throwing out and was of no earthly good whatsoever. Monica was incensed with her husband, as you would expect. "What did I tell you, Philip? I warned you," she chortled. "I told you not to go doing something you regret. But no, you just never listen, do you? Instead, you go charging like a man possessed into the woods, determined to kill a very powerful, very intimidating creature. And then what happens? You can't even fire at it with your rifle. Why not? I'll tell you why. Because your arm went completely paralyzed. Because the creature had so much power over you. He told you he wanted to live with us in peace and in harmony, and he meant us no harm. But you blew it, didn't you, Philip? You arrogantly, pig-headedly threw caution to the wind. And now your contrary foolhardiness has got us tangled up in this dreadful mess. I'm in no doubt the creature intends to carry out his threats to you. So we have no choice, do we? We have to leave, and we have to move away. And that, I'm afraid, is what we have to do. We haven't got a choice in the matter." And that's exactly what the family did. "Where did they go?" asked Marcus, looking somewhat bemused. "The O'Rourkes had an up-and-coming brownstone apartment in New York. Folks like the O'Rourkes have plenty of properties all over the place, like the wealthy so often do. But I know Monica O'Rourke was absolutely devastated to leave Clayton Manor. She always said the manor had got under her skin. She loved living there, so she felt grievously upset about having to be so unfortunately displaced. So you're saying the family up and left and abandoned Clayton Manor for 20 long years, and now very suddenly I get a job as a groundskeeper there, where I'm now obviously being employed by Philip O'Rourke's son. It would seem so, said Edward Kingston. It was a while later, when Edward Kingston had dropped off Marcus outside the wrought iron gates of Clayton Manor. These gates would have been imposing and very grandiose, if they hadn't been tragically obliterated by the deep rust that was aggressively eating its way through the metal, with the feistiness of termites through wood. "Ah, here we are," said Edward, stopping his car very abruptly. "This is Clayton Manor. I told you it was dreadfully run down and derelict. I hope you can get in through the gates. Oh, good, it appears that the gate is not locked. It looks as if it's ajar. I suspect that Zack O'Rourke must have opened the gate for you. Maybe he's waiting for you on the property to advise you on all your duties. I rather think that this might be the case. I don't pity you having to clean the grounds up. It's going to be one hell of an undertaking, let me tell you." "Thank you very much for the lift, Mr. Armstrong," said Marcus, going to the trunk to retrieve his suitcase, which felt really heavy. He waved a hand at Mr. Armstrong, thanking him for telling him the whole story that he'd heard about Clayton Manor, although it had naturally made Marcus feel distinctly uneasy. He told himself that had all happened a very long time ago. If the truth be told, it was probably unlikely that the creature that Philip O'Rourke had encountered 20 years prior, that had told him to leave, was even around any more. And even if it was, Marcus reminded himself that the hairy humanoid had been benevolent by nature, until of course it had been deliberately provoked by the likes of Philip O'Rourke. Marcus had never encountered the creature, so why would it hold a grudge towards him? As Marcus had done it no harm. He needed to tell himself this otherwise becoming groundsman for Clayton Manor might become clouded by a dark shadow of trepidation that he might wear upon his shoulders like an overcoat. Edward Armstrong waved at Marcus. Then his car glided away down the long stretch of pitted road, while Marcus, feeling somewhat bewildered, found himself staring at the grey manor house. In truth, nothing had prepared him for what he was seeing. It was true. The downcast, neglected place looked both abandoned and forsaken, as if the old mansion itself had been targeted aggressively by the natural world, and was rapidly descending into a spiral of unchecked decay, as burgeoning ivy, resolute in its determination to cause as much chaotic harm as possible, had run a rampant riot all over the manor house, with gnarled, contorted and twisted fingers intent on strangling everything in its wake, with a nebulous suffocation. Marcus was most sure that this frenzied vine was probably growing right through the interior ceilings, and had probably entangled itself around some of the 3-story mansion's magnificent crystal chandeliers. The huge, once palatial mansion squatted over a large surface area, which suggested it contained a great deal of sizable airy rooms, probably with high ornate ceilings. In its day, Marcus was absolutely certain that this once imposing grand mansion would have been breathtakingly stunning, and certainly with a fresh coat of white paint on its walls and a big clean-up project, the manor house could actually still become something appreciatively grand, if a monumentally strenuous effort were invested in such a daunting, intimidating fix-up project, which would not be for the faint of heart to undertake. The sizable house almost certainly had very good bones, and was structurally sound. It was well built, but right now the manor house was a sight for very sore eyes, with thick chunks of rust eroding the structure. The anemic, sickly-coloured jejune manor house stared back at Marcus through soulless dark eyes, as if melancholic and sad, almost as if the house knew its glory days were long since departed, and now, like an old hag with frail bones and crumbling knees, she had become all but like a dying flower, almost as if all hope seemed to have been lost. The feeling was so incredibly palpable to Marcus. It was almost as if the house itself could sense the hopelessness of its current plight, and was well resigned to its obvious destitution, like a once wealthy woman who had been disrobed of all her finery and honour, and now had resorted to wearing all but sackcloth and ashes. It was plain to see that no one had manicured the extensive grounds on the property in over 20 years. The entire front yard was a rough, unsightly twist and jumbled tangle of weeds, thorny briars and rambling thickets, with no boundary or restraint, and had so obviously rudely overtaken the entire property. All this undergrowth had done its best to obscure the mansion, with little success. The rampant undergrowth had taken over everything. Some weeds had become as tall as trees themselves, with spiky grotesque appendages and ugly thorns. Marcus noted on what was left of the cracked red brick driveway were a couple of carcasses that looked to be deserted cars, completely covered in rust. They too were surrounded by yet more burgeoning vines that grew into the vehicle's windows, so that Marcus wouldn't even be privy in being able to work out what the cars had initially been. But doubtlessly for their time they would have been significantly expensive. It was poignantly clear from Marcus's scant observation that the O'Rourke family rarely had up and left and never returned to their property. So the rather remarkable story Edward Armstrong had told him seemed to carry a whole lot more weight. It was more than a little dispiriting to witness the degradation of such a potentially grandiose property that had lost its dignity, self-respect and pride, rather like a queen that had been cruelly dethroned from her position of prominence and glory. At the back of the property in the furthest distance Marcus observed some very tall, lofty, ancient-looking trees that were magnificent in both stature and repose. They were like nature's most masterful skyscrapers that ripped very unabashedly into the denim blue sky in a blaze of viridescent green leaves that shone under the morning sun like shimmering emerald jewels. These trees were not prepared to descend into the senseless oblivion the mansion so obviously had done, and were more determined than ever to live out their best years yet. Marcus was most sure that those trees must represent the outside layer of the woodgrove, where Philip O'Rourke had his cryptic, rather unorthodox encounter, but he didn't want to think about any of that now. He could see the job he was about to undertake as groundsman for the estate was not an easy one by any manner of means, but at least it paid well, and at the end of the day money always talks, and Marcus could not afford to be choosy. Besides, he was here now, and he didn't have the luxury of changing his mind about the job. It was obvious that the grounds had not been attended to in many years, so an intimidating, thankless task lay ahead of him, like an uncharted map yet to be explored. At least, he reasoned to himself, if all went well, he'd have a roof over his head and money in his pocket. Marcus opened the large black wrought-iron gate that was rusted in many parts and squeaked furiously when he opened it. It had not been oiled in many years, that was very clear. Thank God it wasn't locked, he thought. Marcus made his way steadily down the overgrown path, across what was left of the red brick driveway, to what at one time had been a stately front door, but the black paint on the door was peeling away like the skin of a reptile. Marcus looked around and about himself nervously for any signs of human life, but everything felt forebodingly airy. Marcus felt something scratching the inside of his heavy suitcase, and then he heard a meow. What the hell? He thought. Something was inside his suitcase. He bent down to open the suitcase that snapped open very suddenly, and rising out among a few layers of his clothing was Talister the cat, who jumped out of the suitcase and took in his new surroundings with large yellow eyes and a kind of "Where am I?" look. Marcus shook his head and laughed. I should have guessed you'd climbed into my suitcase, Talister, given it was so curiously heavy to carry. You always did enjoy lying among my clothes. Well, I've got news for you, Talister. You're not going back to St. James any time soon. You're stuck here with me. But I'll be glad of your company, let me tell you. I've already missed you. But I will let your owner know about your whereabouts. But I don't think she'll be coming for you any time soon. She never was desperately interested in cats. Marcus had secretly almost cried with joy to see Talister again. Talister stretched out her paws lackadaisically, as if she had woken from a very pleasant, satisfactory sleep, She promptly trotted by Marcus's side, dangling her furry body between his legs and letting out a very satisfied, contented purr. Moments later, Marcus set about industriously exploring the estate grounds with a curious intrigue. He needed to get a full sense of the place. There was no sign of Zack O'Rourke anywhere to be seen. The large house was locked up, but Marcus found a manila envelope on the dingy doormat with its faded welcome sign barely even visible. The envelope was addressed to him. He opened it curiously, and a week's wages spilled into his hands, along with a familiar-looking pink stock card. The note on the card read, "Welcome to Clayton Manor, Mr. Deveroy. You will find all the tools you need to attend to the estate will be found in the yard shed, which is very sizable. I have checked they will suit your requirements. Your living quarters are in the cottage on the grounds that is being cleaned out and prepared especially for you. There are a few supplies available for you in the pantry. I hope you will be happy here managing the grounds on my behalf. Your work is greatly appreciated and will never be taken for granted. I will leave your wages at the front door in a manila envelope every Tuesday morning, provided I am fully satisfied with the quality of your work. There is a bicycle available for your use in the yard shed. The nearest town is a 10-minute cycle ride away. But I have taken it upon myself to send you essential supplies every week to the house, which will be delivered by Mr. Thinball, the grocer. These benefits are all part of your wage package. Welcome to Clayton Manor, Mr. Deveroy." Marcus was very surprised to just receive a note from Zack O'Rourke and not to meet the man himself in person. But that didn't matter. Things looked promising. He had already received an attractive wage package before he'd even started working, and that was a great start. Marcus settled down on the estate at Clayton Manor very comfortably. The cottage on the grounds was in remarkably good condition and had recently been renovated. Someone had gone to great lengths to make the cottage sumptuously cosy and warmly welcoming for him. The place smelt of fresh paint, and Marcus could barely believe the good fortune that the entire cottage had been fitted with high-quality, expensive all-wool carpets. The furniture was stylishly comfortable and included a fabulous queen-size bed, the likes of such that Marcus had never slept in before. By the looks of things, Marcus sensed he had really gone up in the world. His living conditions had improved exponentially. Even though the grounds at Clayton Manor were pitiful to say the very least, in due course that would all change. Marcus still had not physically met Zack O'Rourke, even though many weeks had gone by. The man seemed to be as elusive as the Scarlet Pimpernel. But he obviously diligently popped by every single week on a Tuesday as promised to inspect the quality of Marcus's work. He would also get an appraisal of his work, usually written on the pink stock card, in the familiar flowing handwriting. The good news, it would seem, was that Zack O'Rourke was pleased with his work, and every week Marcus would find his pay in an envelope, so he was piling up for himself a decent amount of cash that he looked forward to taking back to Tennessee to give to his mother, who would more than likely be thrilled to receive such money, and also to learn of Marcus's obvious success. Every week Marcus would count his money and thank his lucky stars that he had auspiciously stumbled across an advertisement in the post office that had changed his life for the better, as now he was making such good money, and his life was a far cry from the dingy apartment block he had inhabited at St. James, in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. On arrival at the cottage, Marcus had been welcomed to a pantry well stocked with the most delicious food, doubtlessly all organised by Zack O'Rourke, who had planned everything so seamlessly for him. And against all the odds, Zack O'Rourke had even left a supply of cat food for Talister in the weeks that followed, so no doubt Zack O'Rourke himself must have had a run-in with the cat. Every week the grocer, Mr. Pinball, would arrive in his green van, with a white fancy signage on the side, which read Pinball's Exclusive Grocers. The cheery man would deliver Marcus several large, posh-looking brown bags filled with everything that Marcus would need for the entire week. Marcus didn't even have to leave the property to go shopping in town, although sometimes he did for the hell of it. The food he received was not only included in his job, but was of an extremely high quality, and not the kind of food he had ever been able to afford in the past. Talister had taken to following Marcus around dutifully everywhere he went, rather like a devoted dog. The cat seemed to settle down very well at the manor, and had forgotten all about the grubby apartment block at St. James, where she had dutifully scared off any stray cats that had the audacity of closing in on her territory. Now she had a new territory to protect, but luckily no stray cats had made their presence known as yet. Marcus was sure Talister appreciated the delights of the countryside and everything it had to offer. She seemed to adapt quickly to a whole new life, where nature ruled supreme instead of the concrete jungle of her former residence at St. James. Talister's former owner had been notified by Marcus a long time ago, but had said quite simply that Marcus was welcome to keep the cat. Out here at the manor it was a whole new world for Talister. No doubt she thought she'd died and gone to heaven, when she'd inadvertently popped out of a suitcase and found herself in a dreamy place. It might have at first been wild and extremely overgrown, but to Talister the cat found the place a brand new adventure, with so many exciting nooks and crannies to explore. Marcus was exceedingly glad that Talister had chosen to sleep in his suitcase that day, and had accidentally been ferried to his new job, rather like secret cargo being whisked surreptitiously away, as her companionship was invaluable to Marcus, as it meant he never got lonely. Against all the odds, Talister had lost weight from her exertion in chasing after butterflies and birds. Too bad that at St. James she had possessed zero interest in making inroads into the rat population there. But then again, maybe that was a good thing, as her owner would have wanted to keep her then. To all intents and purposes, Marcus had done an exemplary job in cleaning up the grounds single-handedly at Clayton Manor. His rough, wary, weather-worn hands were more callous than ever. Before long, other suppliers, like workmen, arrived on the scene. Scaffolding was erected around the manor house. Workmen came and went, and began to steadily fix up the place, and the old bedraggled manor house slowly and surely came back to life, like a little spark that finally erupts into an awe-inspiring firework that sets the sky ablaze with its resplendence. One day, as Marcus was sweeping up the dead leaves along the newly laid red brick driveway, he observed a black Buick Roadmaster driving cautiously down the driveway. It parked only a few feet away from the gleaming front door that now boasted a sleek coat of black shiny paint, along with a gold door knocker. Climbing out of the car was a very suave, debonair-looking gentleman with a distinguished moustache, wearing a soft-tailored suit, striped blue and white shirt with gold cufflinks, and a pair of shining black Oxfords on his feet. He trotted over to the passenger side door and opened it courteously, with the manner of a refined gentleman. A glamorous woman, who looked like a movie star, climbed out of the car. She was wearing a long, flowing, red A-line dress with an hourglass red bodice, along with a navy blue shawl over her narrow shoulders. She also wore a designer scarf over her hair, in a navy red and blue floral design, along with a pair of fashionable designer dark glasses that took up most of her petite face. Marcus looked up from the leaves he'd been sweeping, to observe the couple more closely. They didn't appear to have noticed him. Hand in hand, they stood back to stare at Clayton Manor, to get the full measure of it all, and even Marcus had to admit in that moment that the mansion looked splendid, palatial, majestically illustrious, distinguished and dignified, as it lightly had done going all the way back to the 1800s. The young woman threw her arms around the very refined-looking gentleman. She stood before the renovated manor house, and appeared to be caught up in a bubble of awe-inspiring intrigue. Finally she removed her dark glasses from her eyes, that shone like twinkling stars, and it looked to Marcus by the woman's reaction to Clayton Manor as if she'd never observed a more magnificent home in all her life. It would seem, with the diaphanous light of the new morning, casting its ethereal gossamery shadows over the newly painted white walls, the manor house had never looked more stately or imposing. Even Marcus had to admit that the transformations to Clayton Manor had been absolutely tremendous. The manor house now boasted perfect gardens that had successfully been procured with the help of landscapers that had been recruited by Zack O'Rourke. They had trimmed hedges, planted roses, magnanimously thrown pretty injections of colour all over the flower gardens, so everything looked idyllic and wonderful. So many people had come and gone, all injecting their professional brilliant flair into restoring this place to its former glory. So like a phoenix rising from the ashes, the once melancholic manor house had come back to life all over again, like the green shoots of recovery after a long, insufferable winter when all hope appears to have been lost. "It's so beautiful, Zack!" the woman cried out in a musical voice. "Better than I could have ever imagined. And to think you actually grew up here. I can't believe your father abandoned this place and let it descend into ruin. It's criminal to do a thing like that. He must have needed his head examining. What the hell was he thinking? I do love old houses, and this manor house is perfect in every sense of the word. I just love it, Zack. I love it." "Well, my father had his good reasons for abandoning the place, but it's a long story. But we're here now. How do you like your new home, Mrs. O'Rourke?" "Ah, I just told you. I love it, Zack," cried the young woman. And Marcus watched Zack pick up the woman tenderly in his loving arms and open the polished black front door. He carried her over the threshold. The woman was giggling. She kept saying, "Put me down, Zack. I'm far too heavy. I'll break your back if you're not careful." "Nonsense, sweetheart. You're as light as a feather. You barely weigh a thing," chuckled Zack O'Rourke. "Besides, what kind of a husband would I be if I didn't chivalrously carry my new wife over the threshold of her home?" Marcus suddenly realized that the man he was seeing was Zack O'Rourke, and the woman he was with was his new wife. Zack O'Rourke had obviously devotedly fixed up Clayton Manor with a team of renovators, builders, carpenters, cleaners, landscape gardeners, and interior designers for this new wife of his. He was probably not remotely concerned about threats from 20 years prior, when his own father had been told by a hairy man-like beast to stay the hell away from the property. But that had happened an awfully long time ago. Everything was different now, and even the atmosphere at the manor house spoke of brand new beginnings. As Marcus was soulfully reflecting over all of this, the young couple came boldly marching up towards him, with big smiles on their faces. They were a handsome couple that were very much in love, judging by the way they looked at each other so adoringly. "It's very good to finally meet you, Mr. Devereux. As you can imagine, I am Zack O'Rourke, the owner of this house. It goes without saying I'm indebted to you for doing such a marvellous job in managing the estate and taking charge over everything so efficiently. You've done an exemplary job organising all the workmen that have come and gone over the months. You have overseen them all, and your work as groundsman here has been nothing short of flawlessly impeccable. As a consequence of all your gallant efforts, I have chosen to give you a substantial pay rise that is well deserved. Your work has been invaluable. It goes without saying I would like to continue using your services, and that I would like you to remain the groundsman for us here, as very shortly me and my wife will be moving into the manor to make it our new permanent home. Darling, I'd like to introduce you to our groundsman, Mr. Devereux." "Delighted to meet you, Mr. Devereux. I look forward to working with you in the future. I'm so very passionate about roses and beautiful gardens. I want there to be plenty of rose gardens on this property, which I'm sure you will help me with." "Most certainly, ma'am. I'm very fond of roses myself. I look forward to working with you." "Well, I'm so pleased to hear that, Mr. Devereux, because, as I say, I'm going to put a lot of attention into those rose gardens. My husband tells me that you have been invaluable to this place, and that it was quite the mess when you first arrived here. I just want you to know, Mr. Devereux, I'm so grateful for your attention to detail, and that you put your heart and soul into making this place look so good. I can't tell you how grateful I am for that." "It's a pleasure, ma'am. I must admit it was rather unkempt when I first came here," Marcus admitted, blushing with the compliment. "I busted my gut the first few weeks, bringing order to the place. But look at it now. The back-breaking work has paid off. The house has become a jewel. The grounds are beguiling." Mrs. O'Rourke smiled warmly. "I know. The place is absolutely dreamy, more than I could have ever hoped for. I keep having to pinch myself all the time and to remind myself that, yes, Lydia, this place is your home." A few months went by until the O'Rourkes finally did move into Clayton Manor, and Lydia O'Rourke would often speak to Marcus about what she wanted done on the grounds, and Marcus helped her establish some stunning rose gardens on the property, as Lydia loved roses with a passion, and her husband created a rose that was named after his wife, called the Lydia O'Rourke rose. Marcus returned home to Tennessee on several occasions with Tallister the cat to give his mother huge wads of cash, and his mother had been thrilled that Marcus had become so successful. "I told you, son, that going to New York would change your fortune," she said. But little did his mother know how much her son had actually endured and contended with, until he had pinched that pink stock card hanging on the post office notice board that had inadvertently changed his whole life in ways he never imagined possible. Marcus never lost sight of how lucky he had been, for the tide had now changed, and he was no longer living in a dingy apartment at St. James, where rats ran across his face while he slept. But he'd never let his mother be privy to the less glamorous aspects of his life when he'd first moved to New York. He didn't want his lovely mother knowing about the battle he had had to pay rent, the times that he'd gone to bed hungry, with his stomach growling so badly, because he couldn't afford to buy food. There were some secrets he would never share with his beloved mother, so he'd let her believe his trip to New York had all been plain sailing. Lydia O'Rourke had employed about 3 servant girls to work at Clayton Manor, to help her manage the property, along with a cook called Mrs. Bonchina. The couple had hosted some grand dinner parties there, so Clayton Manor had come back to life again. One day one of the servant girls, a young girl called Alexa, came rushing up to Marcus in a panic. She was wearing a white lacy apron over a black servant's dress, and her face was flushed bright pink. "I don't know what to do, Marcus," she cried. "I really don't." "What's wrong?" asked Marcus. "You look very white. Are you sure you're all right? Have you had a fright of some kind?" "Well, that's a good way to put it. I've had a fright, yes, and a nasty one at that. I was hanging the washing on the line, Marcus. I was sure something was watching me from the woods over there. I thought I was imagining it. But when I came back to retrieve the washing from the line, after I assumed it must be dry by then, all of Mrs. O'Rourke's washing was missing. Someone's stolen it. What am I going to do? Mrs. O'Rourke won't be best pleased to hear that her washing has done a walkabout. As far as I know, Zack O'Rourke's washing is all intact. I think there's someone out there in the wood grove, someone that's stolen her washing. I think we may have a trespasser on the property. What am I going to do, Marcus? How can I possibly tell Mrs. O'Rourke her washing has gone walkabout? She'll be very disquieted if I tell her this." "It's happening all over again," said Marcus. "History appears to be repeating itself at the manor." Alexis looked rather bewildered. "What's happening again? You're confusing me, Marcus. What do you mean?" "Well, it's a long story," said Marcus. "Never you mind. You come with me, Alexa. I'm sure we'll find the washing. I have an idea where we might find it." Alexis followed Marcus, and before long Marcus pointed to a trail of stones that led directly into the woods. "What are these?" asked Alexa. "What's going on here? What are these stones for? I feel as if I'm caught up in a treasure hunt of some kind." "Someone's teasing us," said Marcus. "They're playing a joke on us. My guess is these stones will lead to the washing you're looking for." Marcus and Alexa followed the stones, and then Alexa sighed with audible relief as she observed Mrs. O'Rourke's washing hanging over some branches. Luckily it wasn't damaged nor even dirty, which was a relief. So Alexa painstakingly gathered it together in a bundle, looking more than a little puzzled. That was when Marcus and Alexa both heard the chuckling. Someone was having a good laugh at their expense, and Marcus was pretty sure he knew who it was. It would seem the hairy man-like beast that had interacted with Philip O'Rourke all those years ago, telling him never to come back to the manor again, was up to his age-old tricks. Whoever he was, he clearly had a great sense of humour. Alexa turned around, and with an elbow on her hips, she looked extremely pissed off. She called out into the woods, "I don't know who you think you are, but I saw you watching me earlier when I was hanging out the washing for the O'Rourkes. You have no idea how awful it is to spy on someone. You think it's funny, do you, messing around with the likes of me and hanging my washing in the woods? This isn't a joke. It's not funny. Don't you dare do this again, or you'll have me to deal with." And with that she belligerently stormed out of the woodgrove with Marcus at her side, looking far from amused. By all accounts, after this bizarre, very puzzling incident, the washing belonging to Mrs. O'Rourke never ever went missing again. 2 years later, Marcus woke up in the groundsman's cottage and discovered Talissa was not sleeping on the bed with him. She dutifully slept on his bed every single night, following him around wherever he went. But Talissa was nowhere to be found, and Marcus grew unduly alarmed, for he hadn't seen Talissa in a couple of days, and this absurd behaviour, on his cat's part, was distinctly not like her. It was a beautiful spring day. The sky was a cup of blue, and the gardens at Clayton Manor had never been more beautiful. Lydia O'Rourke, with secateurs in her hands, along with a big floppy navy blue straw hat on her head, was fastidiously cutting some roses to form a posy in her hands. It really looked beautiful. "Hello, Marcus," she said when she saw him. "Look at the roses I've gathered. Aren't they beautiful?" she said, thrusting the blooms into Marcus's face. "Don't they smell absolutely divine, Marcus?" "They smell wonderful, ma'am," Marcus agreed. "Are you all right, Marcus?" asked Lydia O'Rourke. "If you don't mind my saying, you look rather distracted. Is something worrying you? Everything is all right with your mother at home in Tennessee, is it? She hasn't taken ill, has she?" "No, it's not that," said Marcus, flushing awkwardly. "It's Talista. She's gone missing. I haven't seen her for a couple of days. You haven't by any chance seen her, have you? It's so unlike her to go missing like this." "Oh, you poor thing, Marcus," said Lydia. "That cat is a delight. But where has she got to? Can I help you look for her, perhaps? She must be somewhere around here. I've seen so many butterflies this morning. She could be on the chase. I've noticed how Talissa loves chasing butterflies." "No, it's kind of you to offer, ma'am, but I'll try and find her myself." "Marcus, don't you worry. I'm sure she's all right. I had a cat growing up, you know. Lovely thing she was. I called her Geraldine. God only knows why I used a name like that. Anyway, that cat went missing for 2 weeks. Never saw her for 2 weeks. It was a long time, you know." "2 weeks?" said Marcus, looking stunned. "You're kidding me." "No, I'm not," said Mrs. O'Rourke matter-of-factly. "Me and my family, well, we put up notices all over New York, you know. I pinned up notices on every tree I found, offering a sizable reward for our missing cat. My parents took me to one side and told me that it was unlikely that Geraldine would ever return home. I remember my father telling me distinctly that maybe she'd been run over by a passing car and was likely dead, lying in a gutter somewhere. My parents were not the kind of people that told you what you wanted to hear. They told you the grim truth, however bad it might be. So yes, I wept for many long days. My father came home one day with a cat to allay my grief, of course. So I called the new cat Gerald, as it was a boy. Lo and behold, 2 weeks later, Geraldine walks into the house without so much as a bye or leave. She was a little thinner, but no worse for wear, and was not remotely amused there was an interloper now in our home, bearing half her name. I was so thrilled to have her back, let me tell you. And that was when I learnt that cats really do have 9 lives. Anyway, in the end, Geraldine and Gerald became inseparable. And they both lived long lives for cats, let me tell you." "So you think, ma'am, that I will find Talista?" asked Marcus hopefully. "But you do forget this is the countryside. It's a hell of a lot different to New York. Things can happen out here." "Well, I think Talista's a sensible cat, is she not, Marcus? I'm sure you will find her. Have you actually looked in the woods? She could be caught up in a tree, got herself stranded, perhaps. I remember in New York our neighbour, Mrs. Penbury, well, her cat got caught up in a high tree branch, was terribly afraid to come down. They had to call the fire brigade, you know. The cat was brought down by a fireman and was as right as rain." "Well, I hadn't thought of that," said Marcus. "Recently Talista's piled on a bit of weight. She was fat like that in New York, you know. But I noticed more recently she's picked up weight again. Perhaps she's not as agile as she used to be. Maybe she's stuck up a tree after all. I should go and investigate the wood grove." Marcus took Lydia O'Rourke's advice and ambled into the woods, calling out Talista's name. A dreadful fear gnawed at his gut, as he imagined that Talista may never come back home again. Marcus looked up every tree, craning his head up to examine the branches, and there was absolutely no sign of Talister to be seen. Where the hell had the cat got to? He called and called her name, and just when he was about to give up on finding her, a random stone was flung at him indiscriminately. He turned around to sharply find a big creature beckoning for him to follow him. The creature was over 10 foot tall, with bright, shiny, dark eyes that twinkled with humour. And on seeing the creature that Marcus soon realised was a Bigfoot, he was in no doubt this was the same creature that Philip O'Rourke had challenged over 20 years earlier. Marcus followed the creature, who was indicating for him to be quiet, and there under a bush next to an old oak tree was Talister, with over 8 kittens that she was now nursing. The hairy man smiled at Marcus, showing a set of pearly white teeth. He let out a chuckle and simply glided away, while Marcus went quickly back to the cottage to get a basket, so that all Talister's young could be brought back to the house. And all 8 kittens were soon adopted by the O'Rourke family and lived on the mansion with Talister, and those were happy days indeed. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.